Okay, so welcome to the Film Architecture and Production Design International Gathering from Mexico. We are here on our third day with Grant Major. We are very happy to have you today, Grant. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I'm going to introduce Grant. Grant recently production designed Jane Campion's film, The Power of the Dog, which garnered a 2022 Academy Award nomination. Prior to this, he designed Disney Mulan and was nominated for an Art Directors Guild Award in 2021. In 2018, Grant designed the Warner Brothers film Meg, and before that, the latest in the X-Men film series, X-Men Apocalypse. Prior to this, his more recent film projects include Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Legend of the Green Destiny for TWC, The Emperor, and Mr. Pip, all independent film productions. He also designed The Green Lantern for Warner Brothers in 2009. Grant Major was nominated for both an Academy Award and a BAFTA for his work as production designer on Peter Jackson's King Kong. Another nomination by the Art Directors Guild for the same film culminated in a Hollywood Production Designer of the Year, Gong for 2006. Before this, Major was nominated for the 3 Academy Awards and the 3 British Academy of Film Awards, BAFTA, for his work as production designer on the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Major won an American Film Institute Award for the Fellowship of the Ring, as well as the Art Directors Guild Award for The Two Towers, and again for The Return of the King. Major finally claimed his Academy Award and a Los Angeles Film Critics Society Award of the 3rd installment of the trilogy, The Return of the King. He was nominated by the International Press Association for a Satellite Award in 2003 for both The Return of the King and his work as production designer on Whale Rider, winning for The Return of the King. Previously, Major received a New Zealand Film and Television Award for the Best Design on Peter Jackson's Heavenly Creatures in 1995. 2 years later, Major picked up the same award for The Ugly. Major's career in design began on television in New Zealand, and his background ranges from production design for Commonwealth Games ceremonies to designer for the New Zealand pavilions at the World Expos and design consultant for the Louis Vuitton 150-year party in New York, Hong Kong, Tokyo, and Paris. Thank you very much once again, Grant. It's truly an honor to have you here. We are all really, really excited. And well, whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen and start your presentation.
Yeah, good. Can you see me on the screen at the moment? Am I, yeah. Hey, look, I'd just like to say, firstly, thank you very much for that introduction. It sounds like quite a lot of things. I have been designing for a little bit under 50 years now, you know, so I'm an oldie. I'm about to give it up, mate. You know, maybe I'll retire soon. I don't know, but you know, it's really nice to be able to be here and talk to everybody in the Mexico film fraternity. So, you know, I think that's really, really cool. I'm just going to share my screen now, and we can have a look at a few slides where I focus in on the subject of the talk. It's called Script to Construction. So I'll talk on that theme for a little bit. So here we go. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. That's the sort of logo of everything, and oops, and that's me. I hope everyone can see that nice and clearly. I thought I'd just pull up a map of the world to start off with, because again, it's really great to be able to share my experience with you all. I'm from New Zealand, and I'm a product of the New Zealand film industry. So I've been working here for most of my life. I have had some experiences overseas in the USA and Canada and England and things like that, but most of what I've done, most of what I'm known for was done in New Zealand. And I'm sort of like I say, I'm a product of this industry. So it gives a little bit of a perspective. My career is a little bit idiosyncratic because of that. You know, it's not sort of mainstream. However, I have had the pleasure to work on a lot of international films that have come to New Zealand to be made. The first, I'm just going to flick over a few films. I'm just going to talk about 3 recent films. I know a lot of you know me through my work on Lord of the Rings and things like that. That was done well over 20 years ago, maybe approaching sort of 23, 24 years ago for me now. And so you know, they're a good achievement on my part, but my imagination is more fixed with the more recent films that I've done. And so I wanted to talk about some of the themes from script to construction, and in particular, the production design sort of choices that get made, how I go about coming up with some sort of design ideas and design decisions that reflect the projects that I'm working for. So the slide up at the moment, the Meg. This is the Meg 1, by the way, the first one that came out. It's a popcorn film, you know. It was a movie that's a vehicle for Jason Statham. So it's always ever going to be a sort of an action flick that's full of you know, spills and tumbles and action sequences and all that sort of stuff. But I really wanted to go back to the beginning part of the project when I was first sort of introduced to it. You know, like I say, you've known me from Lord of the Rings, and Lord of the Rings was written by J.R.R. Tolkien. It was a very beautifully written, very well-described world that the story takes place in. This film, The Meg, is the opposite in a way. It was based on a book by Steve Alton, written around about 1990. It's a film that it was a story that's sort of based in an oceanographic story in a way, about a gigantic oversized shark and a dinosaur megalodon that comes up from the deep and wreaks havoc on the ocean. So look, you know, the sort of the source material, you could say, is starkly different from the Lord of the Rings. You know, this film was a popular book when it came out. It was sort of came and went. It was you know, action, sort of a science fiction horror film, if you like. So, you know, when I sort of take on a project, I've got to consider kind of the flavor and the sort of stylistic sort of thing that sort of film conjures up. The film itself takes place in or starts, I should say, on a repurposed oil rig in the South China Sea. And interestingly, it was recited in the script from the book to the South China Sea because the project was funded largely by Chinese money. So it's a Chinese-American sort of co-production. So one of the changes we had to do is to sort of center it more on the sort of Chinese sort of geopolitics of the world, geolocation of the world, I should say. So it's now sited in the South China Sea, repurposed oil rig. That was an interesting challenge. I didn't know anything about oil rigs. I didn't know anything about oceanography when I first started the show. So it takes a lot of work to sort of visualize and research and sort of find out about how all these things look and function and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really, really interesting job for me in the very early time to be able to sort of take on board this sort of pulpy script that I've been given. The part of the infrastructure of the oil rig was a sort of a viewing deck underwater. So that's what we're looking at the moment, is the piles of the oil rig with a sort of a ring of corridor going around the outside where people can go down and look at the ocean. It was a really interesting sort of job to be able to conceptualize something like this. Now, just a reminder that the story is science fiction. It's based in the future slightly. So, you know, it's interesting. It's the only job I've ever done, actually, that's based in the future. So it was really great to be able to put on a sort of a pseudo engineer's hat and design something that could exist under the in a subsurface kind of environment like this, and to make it look cinematic and funky. So, you know, had a lot of fun doing that, and in particular coming up with the structure of what this viewing deck might look like. So, you know, it's all very well the writers to be able to, for the writers of the script to be able to sort of describe this sort of environment, but that's all they are. They're just words on a page. And for, you know, my job is to conceptualize, and then for the art department in total to be able to carry out the physical manifestation of this, you know, to actually make it real. So it's an interesting journey from sort of conception, where I try to make it feel like it's a sort of recognizable, keeping the physics kind of believable and real, but also making it really interesting and cinematic at the same time. Interestingly, given the film was about a shark, and I wanted to make this these corridors look like the inside of a shark's throat, you know, in a mechanical kind of way. So it was a very interesting sort of design job to be able to make this real. The whole thing is full of compound curves, as you can see. And thankfully, we work in the world of computer-aided design now. So we're able to model all this up in 3D in the computer, and then produce cutting files, which then were sent out to a construction company for them to use their 7-axis router to be able to cut out all these shapes out of timber. And they arrived in the workshop as sort of flat sheets with, you know, like cut out like a jigsaw puzzle. And then on the top left of the frame you're looking at the moment, these structures are assembled into their 3D shape, and they went together beautifully. I mean, I just remembering back to the earlier days, maybe in the 90s and 80s and 70s, when builders would have to figure all this sort of work out with a slide rule and a calculator, and you know, and use a lot of R&D to be able to make up these very complicated shapes. In fact, it would be so time consuming to be able to do this in the old days. We're so thankful now that we're able to produce these sorts of things in a sort of a computer-aided world. And so anyway, we're able to make up this, and you can see the raw sets here before the vis effects are added in, the ocean on the outside of this. Just talking further about this sort of shark architecture, the sharkitecture, you could say, of what this is. I wanted to try and bring together a sort of a feeling of hardness and masculine sort of violent world. So, you know, designing the environments was really, really cool to be able to bring in the sharkitecture, the modular aspects of this sort of industrial space that's been repurposed. I sort of had an idea that it would have been the infrastructure would have been prefabricated, maybe in China, in factories over there, and then shipped out, and then put on top of the existing oil rigs. So everything has a sort of a modular aspect to it. And you know, we sort of brought this into the interior designs to make it feel sort of grey. It's got this sort of grey shark skin sort of colour to it, but also like hard surfaces, industrial surfaces, but also kind of funky, you know, because it's got to be interesting to look at, and just giving it a kind of a strong thematic sort of scheme to it. Now, one of the main things about the production design is that we're having to tell the story. You know, we tell the story in using visual means. So instead of the written language or the spoken language that the actors have, we do a huge amount of storytelling in the the way that we design the sets. We use every sort of tool that we can. And this is a really interesting part of the set designs that we did, which is the communications center on this repurposed oil rig. There's a lot of storytelling these days that goes on via computer, you know, and via the sort of communications that we have sort of over the radio waves. And in this instance, this is the communication center, the nerve center, where our protagonists are talking to the submarines that are happening down the bottom of the ocean. So there's a sort of a disconnect between the above surface people and the submarines down below, but they're connected via all this sort of talking and motion graphics that happen on the computer screen. So the director was very interested in everybody not sort of tapping away at their screen sort of on individual little workstations, but that there's a sort of a communal feel to the layout of this. And so everyone's facing into each other. So having this sort of this internal sort of ability to be able to just look up from your computer screens and see all the other people working away at their screens. But at the top of it, we can sort of see what's going on via all these computer screens. And another sort of vital aspect of this communications things is the motion graphics themselves. So we had an art director devoted specifically to just doing motion graphics, and on the day of shoot, we had a video jockey who's able to have all these screens. We had sort of dozens of them working at the same time, and they were all functioning the way that they needed to function to tell the story via these graphics of the submarines that are going right down to the bottom of the ocean, all the jeopardy that's down there, all the things that go wrong, the communications that go on, were all sort of live. And the guys did a really fantastic job of all this, and it's a very important part of the production design that people could understand all the sort of different facets that are happening at the same time as the actual physical drama. On the bottom left, can't understate the value of really good prop design and things like this. You know, we had Jason Statham sort of all rigged up with biomechanical sort of things to be able to read his vital signs, blood pressure and oxygen levels and all that sort of stuff. So, really, really cool sort of design ideas for that. Now, I'm not an academic, I'm a production designer. I'm a sort of a self-taught production designer largely. So I just wanted to step back a moment here and just consider what it means to be able to take on something that's written underwater. The story happens largely underwater. Like, I'm not a deep sea diver. I don't have like a diver's license or anything like that. And I had to consider, like, what does it actually mean to send a submarine to the bottom of an ocean trench? The book was written about the Mariana Trench. And so this is a little bit to do with the research, but it's also to get the mindset of what it means to go down to the ocean depths. Like it's a hugely long way down. It's 7 miles down underneath the ocean to the bottom of a trench. And I just put up a few little things here. That's the water pressure is 8 tons per square inch in every direction when you go down there. And, it's no coincidence really that there's been way less people go to the bottom of the Mariana Trench than have gone to the moon. It's an incredibly hostile, difficult place to get to. So I have to learn about that in my amateur scientific and amateur physics kind of way. I had to kind of gen up on what it means to be able to design a submarine to go down that deep. The black and white picture is a picture of the Trieste, which is a submarine that was designed in the 1960s. That was the first people to go down to the Mariana Trench. So it's really cool to be able to understand a piece of design like that is going to influence my set design for it. The bottom right is James Cameron's, what's it called? Challenger Deep. He went down there just prior to starting the Avatar series to get into the world of deep sea marine life and things like that. So here's a couple of designs that influence the design that we came up with for the for our submarines, these deep sea submarines. And it's a lot of fun, man. We've just got the best job in the world, haven't we? You know, designing all these things. And yeah, anyway, I don't want to dwell too long on these, but it's really just to do with, you know, how we came up with the set designs that would look funky, kind of feel like they would work in a situation like this, but are also futuristic. You know, here's the inside of the designs have got these LED screens that surround the pilot. Inside of the set designs, the outside of the set design are kind of interesting. They're sort of modular. Everything had to come apart for us to be able to shoot in there. Again, coming around pretty quickly to creature design. Production designers don't normally design creatures so much, but in this instance, we had to sort of do some preliminary design at the very least, because we needed to make the front of one of these megalodon sharks to actually appear in the film. So the development of the CGI shark was being done at the same time as the actual movie was being shot. So we had to sort of take on board the VFX design process, like the skin texture and color, for us to be able to actually make the sharks that the Jason Statham was actually interacting with. So that was a kind of a cool thing to be able to do. We also designed these little reef divers, and we call them reef divers, these sort of mini submarines that had to sort of zip along through the water for the chase sequence at the end. There's no shortcut to making these sorts of things. You know, once again, with the added computer-aided design, we were able to manufacture it the way you do a sort of a prototype of any sort of vehicle. So these are all made by a team of submarine makers that were very, very highly skilled at doing this sort of stuff. And I just pulled this up finally, just a final picture. This is just a reference picture of like the slaughter of the innocents. So, you know, when this shark, and I was talking about the design of the environments for the shark to exist in, you know, like our sharkitecture, that was in contrast. It's to contrast with these all these people that are going to be eaten, you know, all these people, the colors, the beautiful sort of pastel colors of the way that the Chinese crowds were going to sort of appear as. It's sort of like the pastel colors versus the hard gray colors that we had going on earlier on. Anyway, that was one of the films. So I just wanted to contrast that now. Contrast that with another film very quickly, Mulan, that was mentioned earlier on. So Mulan is a different sort of material, sort of different script material, different story material. It's a very old story. It's actually one of the oldest stories in China. It's based in the Tang Dynasty, which is sort of about 650 AD, ranging through to about 950 AD. So it's very old. It's also a Disney film. So, you know, we've got the histrionics, and then we've got the Disney studio and the expectations of the cinema audience when they see a Disney film. You know, it's family friendly, it's colorful, it's scrubbed up a little bit, and sort of it's not too sort of confronting in a way, but the director was very interested in the themes of filial piety, which is the Mulan story. Filial piety, which is faithful to the family and to the patriarchy in particular. But here's a coming out story of a woman who's finding herself in a man's world, you know, like a woman in a man's world. It's actually the story of a woman who has to go to war, learn to be a soldier in a man's army. I mentioned the Tang Dynasty. And I did a lot of research into the Tang Dynasty, but the world that we wanted to create for the young Mulan as she's growing up was revolving around these Toulouse. This is called a Toulouse, this circular building that we use, which is actually not Tang Dynasty, it's a little bit later, but, you know, we felt we were able to sort of be a little looser with our history, with our sort of history of it, and borrow this, which is an existing type of building. The top left is a picture, is a reference picture of these existing buildings, and below left is our movie version of it. So, you know, we designed her world, her young world, to be living in this community, which is sort of looks in on itself. It's sort of insular. And it's also the nice thing about these circular things, it feels like the world. So that, you know, it's the world of Mulan. And she's sort of in the comfort and sort of familiarity of this circular environment. This is our set that we built for it. It's a really amazing, one of my favorite sets I've designed actually, this world, which is a sort of 360-degree apartments that sort of look in on each other here. And it was a very interesting design job to do it. So we sort of researched and looked at all the different examples that we could find. I actually went to China and visited some of these places so that I could cherry pick all the best ideas to put into the set design. That's exactly what we did. You know, we came up with some architectural spaces that worked really, really nicely for the drama. The structure itself, obviously it's all made, it's a long time ago, so everything was made out of timber back then. We employed a New Zealand timber construction company that just makes log buildings to be able to make the superstructure of it. And then the regular construction team did all the facades and the roofs and all that sort of stuff. So it's a very interesting job for them. And of course, standing up a structure like this includes a lot of engineering work. You know, everything has to be legal you know, it has to be structurally legal. So there's a process we had to go through to achieve that. It had a steel structure in behind the log work. Because the extras had to be able to clamber up and over, you know, be on all these different levels, it had to function very carefully for that. So you can see we're just focusing on the courtyard area with that design. And then the interiors were built separately on the stage. So as just sort of standard sort of set designs for that. So it's a really, really lovely to be able to create this world for Mulan before she leaves and heads across country to join the army. And this is another sort of a design conundrum really for me, because we had military experts tell us what being in the military would have been like in the Tang Dynasty, which would have been very rough and ready, you know, nothing like what the script described. You know, the writers, the American script writers, wrote these scenes as though they were in a boot camp in West Point. I don't know, some, you know, American sort of army style setup. So I had to sort of bridge the gap really between what I understood the Tang Dynasty technologies would have been like and what the script describes. So this is probably way more martial looking than what the real one would have looked like. But I wanted to look cinematic as well. The one thing about Chinese design that I've sort of learned through this project was how symmetrical everything is and how hierarchical things are. So there's always a sort of a center line, and things are very evenly divided on the left hand and right hand. The further into a space you get, the more up the sort of grades you get. So the further in you go, the higher up the ranks of the military command are. You can see. Incidentally, this is a piece of production art, obviously, that's painted over the actual location. So, you know, we found these locations after a large search in the South Island of New Zealand, and which served us very well down there. I wanted to concentrate the design on the threshold as Mulan steps into the world of army training. So it's a very important step. Literally, she takes a step across through the gateway into this man's world, the man's world. She's dressed as a man here, by the way, because women are forbidden to be in the army. So she, through filial piety, through her respect for her father who can't go, she's the only one in the family who can go. So she's got to dress up as a man in disguise and go into the army in disguise. So I wanted to sort of make a big thing about sort of stepping into this world past these great big gate guardians, these great big statues that they do have in China. So, you know, they have these sort of gods that symbolize all sorts of things. And I borrowed that motif to put on either side of the gate here. Yeah, and the coming up with the design of the set is one thing, but sort of making the most of the environment that we're in is another. You know, trying to find an environment that that had all these mountains behind it, that really felt like they're close enough to feature in the film. And it's really, really cool to be able to sort of populate it ultimately with the people in costume, and, you know, sort of things just come to life, you know, as soon as you get all the dressing in there and the soldiers in there and all that sort of stuff. It kind of makes a huge difference. And in particular, the costume designs were spectacular on this. And Bina Dagler, the costume designer, was nominated for an Oscar actually for this film with her costumes. And here's Donnie Yen, who's Commander Tung, playing the character Commander Tung. So, you know, I realize that the production design is environments, and the camera is usually focusing on the characters here, but you know, we work hand in glove together to be able to formulate these scenes. Again, you know, creating some of the more intimate scenes for Commander Tung inside his own sort of martial tent. Again, very hierarchical, very symmetrical, and you know, trying to use as many tools as we can to give him sort of the authority that he does have, being the military commander. Just a very quick note about the battalions as well. You know, I tried to contrast the goodies with the baddies. You know, Commander Tung's army is regimented and all that sort of stuff. So this is a pretty production design thing. You know, I really try to pitch this to the directors, that we have everybody lined up in these sort of these very disciplined rows, as opposed to the hordes from the north, because the battle lines are in the sort of the northwest of China, and the Gokturks, who were the sort of raiding parties, who are sort of now sort of the Mongol sort of areas from you know, sort of those outer reaches of China, were more of a sort of not a rabble, but a sort of a less disciplined, you could say, sort of had less disciplined sort of look to them, but sort of nevertheless kind of aggressive look to them. So really, really cool to be able to formulate all these sort of overarching sort of design themes to the style of the film. Coming around very quickly now to the city that we designed. This is the capital city where the emperor is. It was based on the idea of it being Chang'an, which is present-day Xi'an in China. Although the Chinese government, who did have to vet or did have to check the script that we produced for it to be released in China, the propaganda department in China have to be able to accept the script and make adjustments as they see fit. They didn't want to call it Chang'an, they didn't want to call it Xi'an, because I'm not quite sure, to be honest. They just didn't want us to do that. So we had to refer to it as the capital city, the imperial city. So this is just a piece of reference that we did based on what was construed to be the city layout. I must say at this point, there's virtually no extant examples of Tang Dynasty architecture left in China at all. There's one or two pieces, but that's all. There's a couple of significant pieces, but almost nothing else. The city itself is, you know, disappeared essentially. So, you know, from these plans, I had to sort of formulate again the symmetrical nature of it, the hierarchical nature of the layout of the city. So we produced these as a consequence. We're very lucky that China, even though it's obliterated all of its most of its historic architecture, it has rebuilt a lot of these as film parks. So this place called Xiangyang, which is a film park in the Xiangyang city, is a Tang Dynasty film park. And it's luckily for us, that only just finished it a year or two beforehand, and so the world hadn't seen it yet. So we were able to come and study what Tang Dynasty architecture looked like. It was a very, very colourful period. It was a very, it's like the golden years in many ways of Chinese history. It had very, very many different races of people who lived there. Very many different religions were followed there, and it was a golden years, like I say. Now this theme park, this park is, they call it a film park, but in practice it's a theme park. So its primary purpose is to is for the Chinese public to come and visit and experience what Tang Dynasty world would have looked like. Filming comes second. It comes second in their priorities, and we're really only able to stage a few sort of vignettes there of life, and we had to rebuild a lot of it back in New Zealand because the practicalities of actually shooting large parts of large drama scenes there were impossible for many different reasons. So this, here's, you can see the foreground part here was shot in Xiangyang up to the top of the bridge, and then the areas behind that were added in with VisFX, and so that's was our imperial palace that we built sort of virtually the exterior of, and the interior of we built on the stage as a studio set. You know, we went through it the way you'd sort of normally do it. It sort of took up the whole studio. It's just a really, really brilliant sort of way of being able to study and learn about Chinese architecture. And so this is our efforts in turning out the set itself to be able to produce these great sort of cinema moments here. I pulled up this one here because I wanted to sort of give our focus on the what's happening up in around the throne area itself. There's no examples of what throne rooms would have been like in Xiang in that period, Tang Dynasty period. But what I did see in the Beijing Museum were these two very, very small sculptures of dragons. They're only really only about sort of 4 or 5 inches high. I thought, oh, they'll look really cool if I was to supersize them. And I had our sculptors, they spent honestly about 2 months sculpting these things that were going to appear behind the throne and gilding them all, making them all gold. And so we ended up with this sort of look. Here's Jet Li, the actor, playing the emperor in front of our throne room. So the throne. Whether the throne would have been like this, it's anyone's guess. But you know, we really just tried to give it a cinematic, funky Disney sort of a feel vibe to the whole thing, and hopefully that worked. So yeah, I mean, it's an exciting job, isn't it? Again, production design, being able to sort of dial into the history of it, the cinematography of it, the sort of all the ergonomics of it, the manufacturing process of it, and then when everything comes together on the day of the shoot and everything's lit and everyone's in costume, you know, in front of these things, it's just an absolute thrill to be able to experience this sort of thing. Moving on quickly to the third example, the last example of the films that I was going to highlight. Again, I wanted to talk about the source material, the power of the dog. So, you know, we've gone from the Meg, which is sort of a cheap sort of exciting popcorn horror film, you know, not to be taken too seriously, to the Mulan, which is a historic, epic kind of piece based on an ancient story. The Power of the Dog was only written in the 1960s, you know, so it's relatively recent. It's a beautiful book to read, you know, and for all the people listening in, you know, if you want to find a book that's really entertaining and interesting read, it's sort of almost forgotten, actually. You know, it's not a huge amount of people were aware of it. Certainly not me before the film came along. Written by Thomas Savage in the 1960s. The story is based on a cattle ranch in Montana in America in 1925. So a specific place, specific time. It involves cattle ranching, and these are just some of the research images that we looked at just to get into the mindset of what this world is. It's dirty, it's smelly, it's dusty, it's aggressive towards animals, it's men, it's a very masculine sort of place, very physical environment. And it's also, in terms of its time frame, in 1927, it's intersects with Hollywood and with the sort of urban population of America. So, you know, the Wild West and the West in general, that had taken sort of 300 years to get to the point of 1925. And by that time, a lot of people's experience of the Wild West is sort of through movies, through Tom Mix movies and dude ranches. They used to call them dude ranches, as you're probably aware. You know, so people would get dressed up as cowboys and they'd go to these dude ranches and sort of pretend to be cowboys and things like that. So even though the film wasn't focusing on that, the time period did reflect this this transition period, you know, of the early times of the West with the motor car, you know, and the telephone and the electric light, electric power, and all that sort of stuff. So it's a really, really interesting time period to think about. Our film was dominated by this very masculine man, Phil Burbank, his name is. This is just a reference picture that we looked at as a sort of a character study, if you like, of Phil Burbank. It's interesting what you find in photographs, in period photographs, isn't it? Like reference photographs sometimes just hold an idea. They hold a sort of a germ of an idea that they can then get sort of fleshed out into the production design of a movie. One of the things we did have a look at was the photography of the period, and in particular this lady Evelyn Cameron, who did document Montana country life in that period. And again, really, really interesting to look into these photographs and look at details and all that sort of stuff. The way that the buildings can just get plonked on a landscape, you know, just get plonked on the big wide open dusty landscapes, and the contrast between architectural styles that were going on in Europe and America at the time, and then the Wild West, you know, like putting these sorts of buildings, these building styles with all their architectural references and things like that into these big physical open environments is really interesting to me. Finding the right location, again, down the South Island of New Zealand, finding a location that has a sense of place. You know, it's more than, for whatever political reasons, it was made in New Zealand rather than in Montana. I understand the director and the producers did go to Montana. They didn't really find what they were looking for there because Montana's moved on. It's almost 100 years ago now, and we're able to find these sorts of environments in New Zealand that sort of would work for the film. So more important than shooting it in Montana is that cinematically it has to feel like a place that we can remember and sort of relate to. I was talking earlier on about the style of buildings that were extant in the world at the time. You know, it was sort of like a sort of late Victorian, I guess I'd call it, Queen Anne sort of style. I'm not quite sure what the Mexican community would call it in terms of period, but this is the sort of things that were being made in Chicago and in the sort of eastern states of America at the time. The middle one at the top, the black and white photograph, is sort of got hints of a very early arts and crafts style, you know, which would be very fashionable, would have been very fashionable in England and Germany and also in the eastern states of America at the time. There would have just been the very beginnings of that when the house was made. And we're looking here at house styles in the 1880s, by the way, sort of not the 1920s, because the Burbank house was built in the 1880s, and then our story takes place in the 1920s. So, you know, I had to sort of backdate the architecture, obviously. So this is the design of the house that we sort of came up with. I tried to bring in a arts and crafts style, a big family home that would have been planted on the wilderness in Montana. We didn't have a huge budget on this, so you can see we chopped the roof off, and that was added in post-production. But this is our set design. So this is the outside of the house that we built on location, and so it was a really good end result, I thought, and in particular because of the great work that the scenic artists and the painters put into this, weathering something like this down. So the house, like I say, was built 40, 50 years before the story takes place. So this building's been sitting outside. The family that lives in this house is caring more about their cattle than they care about the house. You know, it's a house that's sort of devoid of love in some ways. The parents have moved out of this house 20 years before our story starts, and the house is now occupied by the two brothers who are running the cattle ranch. The inside of the house we built on the stage, and I try to make it feel equally sort of hollowed out and sort of a little lonely in a way. So the two brothers are sort of fighting with each other. They're sort of at odds with each other. There's a lot of anger and rage in the main lead character, and that sort of permeates into the feeling of the inside of the house. Some of the set designs we went into. I try to make the house. This is a piece of production art that sort of tries to conjure up the sort of darkness on the inside. So, you know, the outside world is sort of overexposed. The inside world is sort of dark and moody, sort of a little bit empty, big boned. It shows the sort of interesting sort of life that these ranchers lead. I mean, the lead character does his own taxidermy. He shoots wild animals. He mounts their heads on the wall. He's also a kind of an intellectual. Actually, he's quite a smart guy, but he's also he's gay. He's a gay man, and he's in a time period in America where that was sort of forbidden to even to have anything to do with being sexually attracted to other men. So that was the source of his rage and his anger. And so, you know, this sort of hollowed out dark interior is sort of one of the thematic things I wanted to bring into the design of the film. A huge amount of work goes into testing, and I'm sure you all do it in Mexico, just the same that we do here, you know, just before you go and build something, pre-making as much of these sorts of things as possible. So did a lot of paint tests and fabric tests and composition, making compositions of timber finishes and fabric finishes and all these sorts of things is a very large part of the set decorating, part of the design of the films. Another part of it is learning about the ergonomics of the way that a house would have functioned back then, you know, the cultural and spatial sort of hierarchy that's inside of a house. I went and visited some period houses here in New Zealand to understand how kitchens worked. You know, what are the technologies of a kitchen? What are they sort of, how does it all function in terms of a spatial sort of thing? So it was really, really interesting to be able to learn that about these period houses and how they worked, so that people can really feel at home, so things can feel real. So, you know, got a realistic sort of depth to them. This is another one of my favorite sets, oddly enough. Right next to the kitchen is the cowboys' kitchen, you know, the cowboys' eating area. And this is, again, one of the main themes I wanted to bring out was the matter-of-fact, pared-back life of a cattle rancher. It's sort of unembellished and unadorned, and very workaday sort of feeling to the colours and the surfaces and the textures and layout of all these things. So again, all these things have been thought through and prevised and tested, and sort of talked through with the director and all that sort of stuff. So again, the bedroom on the upper left, everything sort of starts with these sketches that sort of bring out a visual reading of the script, and sort of talks about the layout of the upper rooms and all that sort of stuff, the pared back nature of it, the toned back coloration of everything. In contrast, and here's another one of these color and texture contrasts in the story. When the female protagonist comes along, one of the brothers gets married, to the shock and horror and anger of our main brother. She ends up holding herself up in a bedroom that's a sort of a leftover from the parents' generation. So this is an opportunity to contrast the pared back nature of the cattle ranch house with the opulent nature of a woman's space, a bedroom in the house. You can see we brought in a little bit more color here as well, a little bit more of the red, rosy sort of colors here. And we'll get to the end of the talk now. So I just want to talk now about this great way that production design can help to tell the story with just the simplicity of a building. This instance here, the gay brother, the angry brother, who's the cowboy on the left-hand side, Phil Burbank, is about to seduce, I suppose, in a way, to bring into his world Peter, who's also likely to be a gay son of the woman who has come into our story. So it's like a conquest in a way. So in doing so, Phil is going to invite him into his space, the barn, which is his masculine area, but it's a space that is got the more detailed, nuanced, and gentler side of the inside. So when we go into that space, we can understand the Burbank character more. He's articulate. He's articulate with his hands, and he makes things. He makes little models, and most importantly, there's a shrine there. It's a shrine to this character Bronco Henry, who is he's a character who plays in the movie, but he's just a ghost in a way, because he died some years ago, and he's probably his first lover. So we, in going into the building, into the barn, into that sort of space, we can recognize for the first time what his character is. We get to the nub of his personality. So it's a very important space to me, very important to be able to flesh that out in a production design environment. Very briefly, I'll touch on some of the technologies that we were working with. It was only a $30 million film, so it was a very small budget. We weren't able to make a huge amount, as I hinted at before. We did, for the town of Beach, we were able to make this building on the left-hand side, the Red Mill restaurant and bar. But we were able to, the production design process was designing the extensions, the Visifex extensions of this town, which only appear very briefly, with the railway going through the middle of it. So the cattle are coming into town about to be shipped off via rail to the eastern states, Chicago and what have you. All part of the design process. Inside of the bar, we were very careful with our period details and things like that, but that didn't rule out the ability to be able to be a little bit creative. People would have been as creative in their own ways in the 1920s as they are now, and as eccentric and not abiding by the latest sort of magazine trends necessarily. They could just invent stuff, you know. So I felt kind of okay about being able to get all these zinc panels and whacking them on the wall instead of the ceiling, and just kind of creating these kind of slightly different, slightly quirkier sort of environments. So that's the top right one, was inside the bar. And in the bottom left is one of my favorite photographs, funnily enough, something that sort of sums up the story, you know, the masculinity of beer and the ghost-like spirits that involve that, you know, the unsaid in a way that goes on in the movie, continually being hinted at, this sort of the dynamics, the juxtaposition of the hard and the soft, you know, the light and the dark. And we were very lucky to have a couple of towns that are down in the South Island that haven't been smashed down and modernized and things like that. So we were able to go to a location here for the town of Herndon, the city of Herndon. And thankfully it fell into the color palette and the textural qualities of the production design beautifully well. You know, again, these sort of earth colors, the dust colors, the sun bleached colors that we had all the way through the film, with just hints of red, were you know, we were able to just come and declutter the existing town and turn it into the space that we were looking for. And of course, the city councillors were thrilled to have a movie come to town and actually use their place to turn into a movie. So good on them. This is the final slide I've got, and this is really just the same film. It's to do with the detail. You know, I actually did this scrapbook myself. You know, this is a very important prop in the film. It's a sort of a scrapbook that the Peter character, the young gay son, makes about his aspirations for the world, you know, his dreams of the world. And there's a very interesting, poignant sort of thing I want to leave you with. The director, Jane Campion, who I reckon is one of the best directors that New Zealand has ever produced, she had a thing that we'll call the bullshit radar. You know, she was very attuned to things that work and doesn't work, something that's authentic versus inauthentic, something truthful versus untruthful. And I think that is something that I've learned, and I've learned things on every single film that I've ever done, you know, and I'm still learning. You know, I'm 68 now, you know, so I'm still learning on every project. And this bullshit radar thing is a very important lesson about making things that are real. Because when we go to the film, when we go to the movies, we want to be immersed in a story and not be pulled out of that story by something we don't believe, you know. We see visual effects work all the time in movies now that pull us out of the movie because we know they're fake and they just look wrong. We see, you know, sometimes in design choices, we can see the hand of the art director or the set decorator. Oh, that looks set decorated, or that looks art directed, and it's not real, doesn't feel real. So I guess to me, it's really just this ability to be able to make things real, make things that are you know, our prime job is to get people sort of right into that mindset. That's really what I was wanting to talk about mainly with the slideshow, and very happy to sort of take questions now. And any other comments that people want to make, please let me know. That's what I'm here for.
Okay. So, well, thank you very much for this presentation. People here in the school that want to make any question, please write it down in the YouTube streaming. So I think I can start with my own question. I was really happy to see this architecture. I mean, I'm not sure if you studied architecture, but I mean, even though if you did not, I'm pretty sure you are an architect. I mean, I see this architecture like contemporary, this computer-aided design looks very familiar to me, like Dominic Perrault architecture. It reminds me to Zaha Hadid or Norman Foster or all these contemporary architects. It looks like really, really amazing. And then you presented us a different kind of architecture in Milan that is more historical architecture. And I think that's one of the best things about being a production designer, because as an architect, I mean, we're not supposed to make architecture that looks like from other time, but as a production designer, you can do it, and you can do and you can go forward to the future. And I think that's what is amazing about your work. So well, I have too many questions in my mind.
It's a really good talking point, though, actually, because I'm not an architect. I've never studied architecture, but boy, oh boy, over 50 years of working through osmosis, I've learned a huge amount about architecture. And I think, in many ways, production design is the best part of architecture. It's the things you can see. It's the things you can see and touch. We don't have to worry so much about how to stand it up, with the exception of, what I talked about with that building in Toulouse and in Milan. But it's we do, I think it's very incumbent on us as production designers to obviously recognize architectural histrionics, what all the time periods were, and the building products were at the time, and all that sort of stuff, but also to be really au fait with modern contemporary building design, because contemporary design is the world that we live in now, and I think that it's got a very distinct language. I think we're living through a very distinct design period right now, and it's pressing the architectural things into the service of telling a story. It's narrative architecture that we're doing, and it's a fantastic kind of tool for us.
Sure. Well, I also want to ask, how deep do you go into the detail of the architecture of your designs? I mean, do you like? Probably not right now. I mean, I guess you don't model anymore, or don't like make the construction drawings. But I mean, you design like the smallest detail, do you, or not that much?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I do. Look, I began my career and spent like the first third of it as a set designer. So I learned how to draw these things up on the drawing board back then, and so I was always detail oriented. I always loved the macro and the micro details of all these things. A lot of it is to do with having to learn about it. Take the Tang Dynasty things, for example. The beauty of the Chinese history of architecture is that it's even though they have these large sort of design periods, it's sort of like it's a constant. In the Western world, we tend to build things and then smash them down. We have wars and they get busted down and all gone, and then we come up with something else and that gets busted down. And so they're quite distinct. But the Chinese one is kind of more of you could say, a graphic sort of an even line that sort of runs up through it. So you can track back the style of detail as it goes back through the time periods a lot sort of easier. But yeah, there's a lot of it's just sweating the details, really. It's just kind of making it, making everything kind of have this sort of authenticity to it that, architecture has.
Okay, so I'm trying to read the questions from the streaming, and there's a lot of questions about the Lord of the Rings, and if we were going to talk about the Lord of the Rings, I've always had this thought about the architecture of the dwarves and the architecture from the elves. For me, it looks like the architecture from the dwarves looks very like Art Deco, and the architecture from the elves looks kind of Art Nouveau. Did you think of this when you were designing, or it's just like?
Yeah. Well, look. Essentially, the answer to that is no, we didn't. It came about, we didn't want to look at existing architectural styles per se. I think the most dominant architectural reference point, you could say, would be the Romanesque. So Middle Earth is an alternative history. It's occupied, Middle Earth is occupied by different races and cultures that have their distinct design styles that are the result of who they are and where they live. So dwarf architecture goes back to Durin and his culture of dwarves. You can imagine these stocky, bearded dudes who live underground mainly. They've made all their environments, they've carved out of the inside of mountains, out of rock. And so these swarthy, chunky characters, they're short, with their axes and their very forthright way of doing things, suggests a chunky, linear sort of style to their worlds. I mean, it's logical, really. And then contrast that to the elves who are eternal. The elves are eternal. They live forever. They live as a consequence of living forever. They live very close to nature. They've chosen to live apart from everybody else in forests, and in forests, they naturally in trees and things like that. So trees have an organic, linear sort of quality to them. They're sort of more, it's had more sort of arabesques, and so they're sort of lighter and more ephemeral. So, I think it's just through coincidence, really, that this Deco and Nouveau kind of thing has come about. But essentially, their styles have grown from their cultural sort of environments and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the other day hearing that you said that architecture from the Lord of the Rings is not fantastic, or it's more like alternative culture. It was something similar, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Peter Jackson. We talked about the nature of fantasy with Peter, and he said right from the very beginning, see, this is not a fantasy film. It's an alternative history. And that being so, it's grounded in things that we know and we recognize. So even though Middle Earth is, written as a sort of a different time and place, it was important for the audience to be able to connect with the cultures that we were making, and they do that through these touchstones. Like I say, we're using the Romanesque sort of era, that sort of technological and architectural era, and particularly in the architecture of the men, the men who and their sort of kingdom and culture in the story. But and so then when we brought in things like dwarves, they're believable, because we believe, because so many tangible things that we recognize elsewhere in the film, the fantasy side of things, these the hobbits and the elephants with the 4 tusks and all that sort of stuff can all have a semblance of realism to them. Yeah, I hope I explained that well. Keeping it real, even though it's not real.
Okay, so we have a question here in the streaming. I'm gonna read it. It says, in this type of productions, is everything saved with a historical archive in mind for the future, or are most of the materials recycled by appealing to sustainability?
Oh yeah, good. We work in quite a wasteful industry, I think, at the moment, and things are changing. In particular, when Mulan came around, actually, and Disney, they're very, very conscious of recycling and upcycling and all that sort of stuff. We do deconstruct the sets, and we try and reuse as many things as we can. You know, a lot of it's chopped up for firewood, to be honest. But we try and sort of throw into the landfills as little as possible, really. And also the materials that we use these days are way less toxic and way more friendly to the people who have got to actually physically interact with them. You know, like the painters and the plasterers and all that sort of stuff have to be able to use these sort of more organic materials if at all possible. Things like props and things like that, the actual bespoke props that are made for the film go into archives. Yes, you know, like the Disney side of things, everything gets put in a warehouse. Who knows what happens to them in the future? They'll probably get used for some amount of publicity and things like that, but I don't know what their final fate is going to be. But all the other ancillary things, the other material props and dressing does get sold and you know, given away to other prop houses and all that sort of stuff. We try and hire as much as we can. So, you know, we're learning, we're getting better, and I think there's some way to go. But yeah, we're very conscious of you know,
good
things like.
we have a lot of questions. So the next one is from Nicole Camacho. She says, when did you realize you wanted to be a production designer, and what's the part you enjoyed the most about your job?
Yeah, good. Like I never really decided to become a production designer per se. The first job I got was in a TV station, a local TV station, as a set designer. And I was spent about 4 years doing that, and then I went off to England, to London, to work at the BBC for a while, where I really learned properly how to be a set designer. So I worked there for about 4 years and came back to New Zealand, and the television systems here in New Zealand had cut out all the design departments, and everybody became freelance, and I became an art director pretty quickly after that, a standby art director, I'd call it. So I'd be on location, sort of, you know, set decorating and all that sort of stuff. And then I just graduated into becoming a production designer. So I've always been in the industry of sorts. The production design as a career, I never even knew there was such a thing until I got to England and see that there were some people from the BBC who had graduated into being a film production designer. So yeah, it's good. And what I love about it most is I think it's working with a lot of other creative people, both builders, painters, sculptors, glass blowers, jewelers, calligraphers, all that sort of stuff, and with writers and editors and visual effects supervisors and all these it's incredible creative army that comes together to be able to make a film, and we all work collaboratively together. Importantly, for the most successful ones with directors who are auteurs, those directors who add a sort of singular voice to a film, very important for me. So yeah, here we go.
Thank you. Well, the next question is asking the same. How did you become a production designer? What is the professional origins of the new generation of production designers, and what are the options out there to study around the world?
Right, great. Well, look, like I say, I'm a New Zealander, and so what happens in Mexico, what happens in America and England and Europe and all that sort of stuff are all different. What advice I give to people wanting to do what I do is to start by doing an architecture degree, because it teaches you the discipline, the profession of being a three-dimensional designer. And you know, it's not as though there's a sort of in my country anyway, like an art school that teaches 3D as a sort of as a major subject, you know. So I think going to a architecture school gives you, you know, the 3D thing. It gives you drawing skills and the right sort of computer programs to be able to do that. Teaches you communication about how to pitch ideas and, you know, get these things through sort of a hierarchy. It teaches you about budgets. It teaches you about the importance of timing, you know, and scheduling and all that sort of stuff. So that's what it is here. There's probably in Australia and sort of the bigger countries, they have film schools that would might have production design programs. So that's another way of doing it. If you're not interested in going through academia, if you want to get a foot in the door of an art department, the best thing you can do is learn these drawing programs. You have to learn how to draw, you know, how to technically draw. But using things like Maya and Rhino and editing programs and doing illustrating programs, you know, Photoshop and all that sort of stuff. That's another way of getting in to do it and work from the you know, through the ranks of an art department. And please don't think you're going to get to be a production designer quickly. It's a long time to do it, and you have to learn a huge amount of different skills, a huge amount of different ways of going about doing things. And you know, it's great to be able to find a mentor, you know, find a designer or an art director that you can sort of latch onto and learn from them, and preferably a variety of them, you know, because everybody goes about doing things in their own way. And, you know, essentially there's no one way of getting into a design department. It's just, you know, you get in the best way you can, but it really depends on what you've got your sights on as well. There's great careers in being a set designer. There's great careers in being an art director. There's great careers in being a props master or a props designer or an illustrator and all these sort of things. You don't have to become a production designer to get a fulfilling career in this business. Honestly, it's there's so many different important people that have a role to play.
Thank you. Well, we have another question, and he's talking about the script. When you read the script, it says, when you talk about it with the director and his narrative, what are the points he uses to create or manifest the narrative of the script to what we will see in the picture? Can you tell us about this creative process when you download this idea?
Yeah, great. It's going back to the core of the relationship between the designer and the director. I work with different directors, and they each have different ways of approaching how they go about doing their work. Some directors, like Peter Jackson and co, are incredibly visually minded. You know, they have, you know, as they've written the script or been involved in that, they've come up with these visions in their head about how things are going to look. Other directors don't have a good visual idea about how to go about doing things. They might have come from being a writer, you know, so they know how to build a story. Some of them come from being an editor, so they know how to construct a story, you know, how to sort of how all the pieces are going to fit together. So it really depends on who you're dealing with, I think. But in each instance, I'm being brought on as the sort of visual guy. You know, I'm the guy who's brought in to sort of create the world, the time and the place within which the drama takes place. So I like to talk to them about the story, obviously, kind of what are the building blocks of the story? What are the big dramatic moments in the story? The way that the story arc goes. I start with that, you know, and then I start with, okay, what's the sort of stylistic thing that we want the audience to experience? You know, is it going to be the facts only? Like, is it sort of documentary style where it's kind of everything's got to be as accurate as it can possibly be? Or is it sort of a stylistic thing like King Kong, you know, which the mood of everything is kind of, it's got some intensity to it, this difficult environment to it, this sort of sharp and aggressive sort of thing going on? Is it something like The Meg, which is like an action thing, which is just like full of all sorts of funky, extraordinary, wacky kind of creative kind of things, you know? So it's that sort of having those sorts of conversations. But I think they all round, to me, what they all round on is, we're storytellers. The director and I'm a storyteller. The story itself is like a vessel, You know, the story is a vessel, and inside the vessel is a psychological exploration of what's happening in the story. You know, between our characters. Well, the main characters are experiencing something. You know, is it a coming of age story? Is it like is it somebody finding themselves through the interaction with someone else? You know, I think that's really what we go to the movies for at the end of the day, is a greater understanding of the human condition, you know. And I like to be able to really find out, you know, from the director what their compass is on this, you know, what is the nub of the story below the dialogue and the action sequences. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And then Cesar Flores asks, how did you come to the Lord of the Rings?
Wow. Okay, good. Now, look, a lot. The film business is filled with it's a who you know business. You know, the longer you spend on it, the more people you meet. A lot of people fall away and they leave the film business. A lot of people find what they're going to do that doesn't interact with you in the film business. A lot of it for me is finding and getting on with people who are like the prime movers in the business. You know, and I met Peter Jackson in one of his earlier films. We did one called Heavenly Creatures. So he just found me as a production designer. That was back in the early 1990s. And we hit it off. You know, we got on really well. We made that movie together. And then we made another movie together called The Frighteners. And then, so by the time Lord of the Rings came along, I was part of his stable of people that he would go to. So he would come to the designer. He had a good working relationship with the DOP, Andrew Lesney. There's Richard Taylor, who runs Weta Workshop in New Zealand, and other people in the visual effects area. So, you know, an auteur like that has a group of people that he came to. And I was lucky to be one of that sort of team of people. It was a very secret project when it was started. You know, nobody knew that Peter had the opportunity to make a movie from that property. You know, of the Lord of the Rings books. So at the time, we were all working like you do with a lot of movies. We all work in secret, developing these projects until the studio is ready to publicize things like that. So yeah, I was lucky. I was just dumb luck in many ways that I got to meet Peter Jackson, but it's kind of, you know, working together gets a sort of a collaborative kind of relationship that you have with people. You get trust. It's to do with trust, I think.
Were you a fan of Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings before making the movie?
Yeah, I was. I wasn't a sort of a rabid fan. I read the book when I was in my teen years. It's actually, interestingly, the Lord of the Rings book is one of the most well-read books in the world, but also was before the movies came out. It was one of the most well-read books in the world, in the top 3 or 4 or 5 books in the world. So imagine the responsibility of being given the design job to bring that to life. A lot of people at the time were saying this should never be made into a film. It's so well written that it's enough for people to imagine it in their heads, you know, what the world is like. So that's one of the main reasons that we took the source material, the books, so seriously, because we had all that massive fan base, millions of people to satisfy with that. And so in particular with the early parts of the book, as you might be aware, you know, we really went through line by line with Hobbiton, you know, okay, if they go from Bag End down the hill to the party field, how far is that? They go through a gate. So the gates in between, all these sorts of things were all thought through and sort of manifested literally from the words on the page. From there on out, you know, once we had sort of nailed the exactness of that, we sort of moved on to, we were able to loosen up a little bit when it comes to things like Mordor and Isengard and those sorts of places. But yeah, it's a fantastic book. You know, it's a once in a lifetime thing, really, to be able to do, you know, work from that sort of material.
Okay, so we have another question from Ana Victoria. She says, do you consider appropriate to use certain anachronisms to express something different in period pieces?
Just run that past me again, sorry.
Yeah, she says, do you consider appropriate to use certain anachronisms to express something different in period pieces?
Anachronisms. Yeah, I do, because, you know, design and the world still has to have personality, doesn't it? You know, we can do things absolutely literally by the book, the way that history sort of describes these things, but bringing character into an environment is also good. It keeps the interest up, you know. So I don't feel constrained by having to be exactly the way that the history tells us things are, because we're making a movie, you know. At the end of the day, we're making entertainment, you know, and things have to be interesting, things have to be alive, and like I was saying before, people were just as quirky and eccentric and creative back in the day as they are now.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question. I think it's also about sustainability. Cassandra says, do you think the film industry is trying to improve in terms of environmental and sustainability issues by recycling materials from film sets? And what do you think can be done about it?
Yeah. Well, I've sort of answered to this a certain amount. You know, we do take it seriously, and unfortunately, what we produce in terms of the finished sort of production designs and sets and things like that are absolutely bespoke to a film. You know, they are absolutely made for a specific time period and dramatic situation. So they're also owned by the production company. You know, they're not owned by the builders and myself or anything like that. So they have a commercial imperative to own and to manage the things that are left behind by the film. So yes, we are very conscious about the environmental aspects of things, but we can't give things away sort of holus bolus, because you know, people could misuse them. It could have a knock-on effect to the marketing of a film. So, you know, we do have to be careful with things like that. Yes, things that are made for film sometimes do end up at my house. I've got to say, you know, I collect a few keepsakes and things like that. But other than that, you know, we have to be responsible with how we get rid of things, for sure.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so Itzel says, how much time did you have to design the works you showed?
How much time did I have to design?
Yeah. It's how much time did you have to design the works you showed?
The works that I showed? Oh, I see. Oh,
how much
okay.
time did you have?
How much time? Well, look, that varies. Most film projects tend to start and finish within a year, within a calendar year. That's the production side of things. You know, obviously the scripts and the business side of things take years sometimes to come together. But by the time I get involved, it's within a year. Having said that, other several films I've done have gone over that. You know, Lord of the Rings was, you know, near on 4 years for me. The other films, sometimes I get employed prior to the script being ready, and there's a delay, and as they try and get their script working, you know, like on The Green Lantern, not a particularly successful film, but I started work on that before the script was ready, and we just kept on working as they were working on the script, and like a year went by, basically. The best part of a year went by while we waited for the script to sort of be ready to make. So the bigger films take a longer amount of time. Within the year, you know, we usually developing a film for about 12 to 14, 16 weeks or so for pre-production. The shoot happens usually around about, for a small film, it'll be like 12 weeks, 14 weeks or so. So, you know, it really depends from production to production and from job to job, I must say.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another question from Frida. She says, how is your relationship with your construction coordinator, set designer, and art director? How to be a good leader? And where should the focus be when working on a large-scale project?
Good. Yeah, great. Good question. You know, we work in a collaborative medium, of course. You know, the more dictatorial people are, the less successful they are, I think. So even though I'm a team leader, I'm the designer, I am open to other people's suggestions. You know, people have great ideas, and I encourage that from everybody that I work with, right from the runner, you know, to right through to the art directors and all that sort of stuff. But the key people, like the construction manager and the art directors and set decorators and things like that, are fundamental to the success of a show to me. So that's why, interestingly, that's why I'm still here in New Zealand. You know, I work with a team of people that I really know well, and that we've done these big shows together before. They're a known quantity, and I think that adds a lot of strength to my job, is having these people that I can rely on. So they in turn have their crew. You know, the construction guys have their foremen and their outside contractors and all that sort of stuff that they can rely on. So all these things are, all these people have their people. Right? But the art directors in particular are often, the ones I like most are the ones that are not wanting to do my job, but that are wanting to do their job. You know, so it's a very competitive business, and the art directing itself is a very, very important job. And a lot of people have made their careers being art directors and supervising art directors. And the skills that they bring on are a little bit different to what I have. You know, that supervising art director has to do budget, you know, have to manage the business side of the art department. So that's a very important job in itself. They have to manage the people side, you know, they have to pull the crew together and, you know, make sure that things are delivered on time and on budget is a very, very important job. So, you know, I prefer the people who are skilled in that rather than the people who are sort of waiting to become a production designer, to be honest. You know, individual art directors, you know, they have their own jobs to do they have jobs within the job. You know, they have specific sets that they're going to follow through from the inception right through the construction, the design process to the construction process to delivering it into the stage to be ready to shoot or onto the location. You know, it's a full-time job. It's a big job. So they're all you know, have their own sort of parameters and their own sort of dynamics and what have you. And I rely on the very best that I can find for those and keep using the same people.
Thank you. Okay, next question is from Gerardo. He says, how do you collaborate with the DP?
Oh, the DP. Yeah, great. I didn't really talk about this very much, this very, very important aspect of things. You know, we're all aware that everything that we do gets filtered through the lens of a camera. And it's not as simple, of course, as setting up a camera and just shooting things. They bring their own stylistic skills to the fore. And the best ones that I've worked with sort of just bring, you know, just enlarge the whole world that we create so much. So, you know, getting on with them, you know, being in the same frame of mind, having a creative relationship with them is really, really important. I'm often on before the DP starts, you know, that I'm often on way before. In fact, the things are being designed and they've been designed in a way that it's going to be lit, and the colors and all the things that are going to appear on the screen have often been designed and conceptualized and built before the DP starts. It's only on the very big things where they're on early. So, they're reliant on me and I'm reliant on them, because my job is finished. When these sets are standing on the day of shoot, my job is finished because I can't do anything more with the set. So from there on in, it's the directors, the actors, and the director of photography that I've got to make it work. And, their sort of collaborative work kind of makes the thing so much bigger and better than what the simple design is.
Okay, thank you. There's another question. And it says, what's your approach on building a set that has to look realistic?
Yeah, good. A lot of it is, it's sort of every step of the way, really. I can, when I'm looking at a movie, I can always get the feeling whether it's real through the proportions of the set and the detailing of the set. But in particular, it's the surfaces of the set, the textual surfaces. Are they like how they would actually be? Is that how I know the world? Or is it the way that, is it not, So it's, I think it's just being very, very careful and authentic as much as possible, sort of all the way through the design process and the construction process, the way that things are lived in, I was talking earlier on about, I can tell where an art director's been sometimes, because things are sort of idealized. And the world isn't like that. I like environments that are lived in, that feel like they've got personality, but also feel like they've got an ergonomic sort of history to things. So I like that, but I also do like good composition. And, it's a combination of things. It's sort of nuanced, and it's not an easy sort of thing to describe, really, but it's just kind of being conscious of all the detail and all that sort of real world things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Then there's another question. It says, can you talk about the difference between working with these directors in projects you just present? It says, that's what it says. And then I read it again.
Okay.
Did you get it?
Yeah, I think I get it. It's how do I'm taking the question as, how do I pitch ideas to the director? How do my ideas interrelate with the director's ideas? Which is good, because we talked about what we talk about with the director when we first start a film, but then I go away and do my own thing for a while. And it's something that I reckon needs to be taught more at art schools and architecture schools, is it's all very well learning to be a designer or learning to be an architect and things like that, but your work's going to remain academic as long as it takes before something gets made. You have to be able to the end process is getting something made. And to get it made, you have to sell the idea. So you've got to get this idea that you formulated in your brain and get it out on paper or get it onto a computer screen or something like that. And I do that via pencil sketches, but also via illustrators. If there's a very complex kind of idea I want to get across, I've got a great team of illustrators, concept artists, that can produce these sort of production moments from the script. And what I've got to do is I've got to present them, not just the image, but also with a lot of talking, the way that it works in context with the story, something about how we could go about doing it, actually physically doing it, and get their sort of colonize their imagination. So what I'm doing is getting my idea and putting it in someone else's head, in the director's head, in the producer's head. And so if I can do that, if I can get them into the same sort of visual, I've sort of got a hook. That's like a hook, like a going fishing, And then I find that they become dedicated to the same idea. And and so it's a series. The design is a series of these production moments that build up like a library of these ideas. And over time, I've touched on all the production moments, and I can lay them all out in a room, which is really good, or on a PowerPoint presentation or something like that, in film order. And we can look at the story of the film in production design terms, you know. And I think that's really, really important. It's what they are employing me for, and it's me selling my ideas back to them in visual form. And it's a very, very powerful tool. Believe me, it's a very powerful tool, because directors, they do like to pre-make the films over and over and over in very many different ways. The script is a pre-made film, if you think about it, in word form. Directors like to pre-make things in previs and storyboard forms, you know, so that's pre-making the film. It often gets pitched verbally. So they have, you know, like they get the actors together and they do read-throughs. That's pre-making the film in a spoken word form, you know. And so the production design is pre-making the film in this visual language that we use. So it's a very, very important process, you know. Our language, production design language, is imagery. So it's using that.
Thank you. I think we still have a few questions. Lucia says, what's the difference between designing a horror universe versus sci-fi or a drama?
Yeah, cool. You know, there's those what would you call them, sort of styles of film go way back, don't they? You know, they were making horror films back in the 1920s and 30s, and sci-fi perhaps more as kind of a slightly newer medium, but they have a sort of a language to them, don't they? You know, when you think of a typical horror film, you think of like a closed claustrophobic environment, I suppose, with a lot of darkness and a lot of sort of pregnant pauses, you know, waiting for something like that to come out of the dark and things like that. So there's sort of tropes you can use that sort of define what a horror is. You know, the color red is used in horror a lot. Sci-fi, you know, I mean, just be careful we don't sort of rely on cliche too much, don't we? You know, they do have a sort of a cliche aspect to them, but at the same time, if you want to do something original and new, you've got to break out of that a bit. But you know, one of my more favorite films historically is that first Alien film. It's a favorite of lots of people, Ridley Scott's Alien. To me, that's like a horror house. It's like a horror house in space, you know. So it's like it's isolated, it's dark, it's cramped, but it has all the same sort of tropes as a horror film, but it's got this sci-fi sort of thing to it, which is nice as well. It's more of a horror than a sci-fi in a way. But the thing I like about sci-fi is that it explores new ideas. You know, it explores science and technology a lot more, and I think that that's what sort of attracts me to it. Although I've never really done, like I said, I've never really done a proper sci-fi thing before. I've just done things based in the future a wee bit. But yeah, I think it's you know, you've got those things, but it's also goes back to something being real. You know, we want to go to the movies and get lost, don't we? We want to get lost in the darkness for an hour or 2 hours of our lives and be immersed in that thing. So just being sort of you know, being able to be sort of, you know, detail wise, just being in there and not in. So if we're going to watch a horror film, we want to be in that house, don't we? We want to experience that creature as the protagonist experience it. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm raving on a little bit, but it's just a thing.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next question. Elisa says, what is like to see a world that you create in sequels recreated with other hands, either in Meg 2 or in The Hobbit?
What's it like to experience the films, like to look back at my work, you mean, on the cinema screen? Would that be right?
Yes, she says, what is like to see a world that you created? I mean, like
Yeah.
afterward. Like,
Oh yeah, good.
Design.
Yeah, good question, really, because it's you know, when I start a movie, read the script, things come into my mind. You know, I can't wait to read the script. And the first read is usually a very long read. I take like half a day to read a script sometimes, because that first impression are the things that stick with me sometimes. These ideas that pop into my head are very vivid. And, you know, cut to a year and a half later, and I'm sitting in the cinema, and I've come the full circle. The full circle from that original idea, the nub of an idea, to actually looking at it in the cinema is really, really a profound kind of thing. You know, it's something we've made, we've built something. And it's not always exactly like how I first imagined it. You know, sometimes, you know, there's all sorts of compromises and all sorts of things come into play between the ideal of what you imagine and the practicality of what's been made. But oftentimes it's way more and bigger and better than my original idea, because it's usually done with all these other creative sort of things that bolster it. You know, there's the soundscape and the music and the acting and all these sorts of things that have brought these other dimensions to the design that they're really cool. You know, it's a pretty heart-stopping moment, I've got to say, watching a movie for the first time. Is it going to be any good? Sometimes the making of a film experience is fantastic, but the film itself is crap. You know, it may not be as good. It may not live up to that excitement. Sometimes it's the other way around. You know, sometimes the making of the film can have been very difficult, you know, and but the final product, wow, is it really as good as that? You know, was it really that good? One project I've done that's both of those, Power of the Dog, was fantastic to make and really great to view. You know, came out so much better than I ever thought it was going to be. So, yeah, who knows? Who knows what could happen?
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Cesar asked, can production design express as a character? I mean, we heard this before, that production design itself, it's like a character. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is like a character, you know, but it's more than just a character. It's okay. It depends on the story, I guess. You know, the Power of the Dog story was very much to do with a character, but reflective of a character, but it's also reflective of the drama that's taking place. You know, it's the time and place in the first instance, you know, take Power of the Dog, you know, 1920s Montana. But it's not just that, you know, it's the story structure and the situation that we find ourselves in. So, you know, when we start a story, you have to imagine that there's been things going on before that story starts, and there's things going to happen after that story finishes. So it's within the context of a time, a sort of a time period, or a dramatic situation. You know, things may have happened before the event, things may happen after the event as a result of the story. So it's like we're designing all these threads, all these sort of nuances that go into the production design, but also the characters and their situation that we find within the story. So yeah, I mean, it's fundamental to the production design.
Thank you. Okay, there's another one that says, if you were to teach a workshop for architects aspiring to work in the cinema industry, what skills would you try to promote in them?
Yeah, okay. So if I was teaching an architecture school or something like that, but majoring in movies, okay. Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot of things. I've never done an architecture degree, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But you know, a lot of architecture is to do with plumbing, electricity systems, structural systems, and all that sort of stuff. You don't have to worry about all that sort of thing. You know, I think the most important thing, we're sort of we build facades in a way, like from a practical point of view, when you walk into a film set, it's just like, it's only surface deep, isn't it, in a way. So yeah, it's the impressions, it's the impression of architecture. We're making these things that feel like they have more depth, that they're real. But I guess it's the art history, I think, is very important, and art history and architectural history are very important, because it gives context to everything that we're doing. I think that designing in 3D is very important. Materiality is very important, but also, from a movie point of view, like what happens to materials? You look at concrete, for example. You look at new concrete is different from old concrete. Old concrete is different from damaged concrete, or concrete that's been in a war zone, or something like that. So we have to design we have to be conscious of the sort of materiality that sort of that brings out all the sort of textures and things like that. Not just architecture, but decoration. It's like a hybrid, really, between architecture and interior design, because the wallpaper styles, lino styles, and all that sort of stuff, all those sorts of things have to be designed and made. You have to understand them within the context of design history. Yeah, it's just like I think you do, like I touched on before, you do have to the sort of professionalism of architecture is really, really good thing to be able to learn about, because we work, I should say, in the film business, in a business environment that has responsibilities, and we have to live up to those. Otherwise, we won't get another job. If things go over budget hugely, we won't get employed again. If things don't get delivered on time, we won't get employed again. So all those sorts of responsibilities are things that architecture. One thing I must say, the film business is very fast-paced. I find that architectural students who come in and do set design think, whoa, that's happening all very quickly. We got to make the set in a week. Is it going to be finished in a week's time? You design a building, it could take years to get made, years. So the decision-making in architecture is a long form kind of thing. All the moment-to-moment decisions could be a week, could take a year for decisions to get made in architecture. We make them right now in the film business, because we're delivering every day. We're delivering new sets every single day, and it's a high-powered, fast-paced, on your toes kind of business.
Okay, I have another question. I know you're a legend in production design, and you have been in the industry for many, many years. But is there any kind of project that you want to do that you haven't done yet?
Well, look, every
kind
new
of
project,
story or something.
Yeah, like I've got to say, every new project is total excitement for me. That's why I don't look back that much. I do collect pictures for things like this, but Lord of the Rings is a long time ago for me now. And every time I do a film, I get rid of the last film out of my imagination, my brain, and input a new film. So I'm always totally excited by the latest and greatest thing, because it takes up all my imaginative time and energy. In terms of ones that to me, it's not to do with types of films. I say I haven't done a sci-fi yet. It would be interesting to do a sci-fi, but to me, that's not the main thing. To me, it's working with the best in the industry, working with the best directors I can find, working with scripts that are really, really amazing scripts, and have got amazing stories, have got great character development in them, and all that sort of stuff is the most important thing to me. I find that the ones that give me that are usually sort of mid-sized films now, small to mid-sized films. The great big sprawling productions, you know, let's say for the sake of cliche, the Marvel sort of films are less interesting to me now than ones that are like original. They've got an original story to them, breaking new ground, that are more risk-taking and have just got great personalities involved with the making of it. You know, that interests me.
Thank you. Okay, so unfortunately, we don't have any more time. In case we want to like explore some of your other works, like talking about, I don't know, like Kong or Lord of the Rings. If we want to like see any of those drawings or concepts, is there any like website or something that we can like try to search or something to find some of your other works?
No, is the answer to that.
No.
There's no website. Believe me, when drawings and all that sort of stuff get done, they're owned by the production, and they lock them away, and it's very, very hard to get hold of them. A lot of people have asked me for designs of Bag End and all that sort of stuff, and I've just got to say, I don't have them anymore. I haven't seen them since I walked out the door of the production, and they have they archived them, and to be able to pull these things out of archive is very, very hard. In terms of just imagery, you know, I can't offer anything more than what you'd find online, to be honest. You know, a lot of the work that I do is still owned. You know, I sign an NDA, you know, so these images, in fact, you know, a lot of the production illustrations and all that sort of stuff are all owned by the productions still. And so they're not sort of, you know, common property, if you know what I mean. So,
Okay, I understand.
good luck with that.
Maybe we can try to find any behind the scenes documentary or something.
Yeah, well, look, you know, the DVDs, the old DVDs used to have behind the scenes stuff. So, you know, a lot of movies that I have done do have that. And I guess the more contemporary ones, there must be ways of accessing behind the scenes footage. But I've got to say, I very rarely look back at things like that. So I couldn't recommend where to find them.
Okay. Well, I think we can have one last question. Mariana says, if you can give us any advice for the future art directors or production designers that want to get involved in this world.
Yeah. The film business suits a particular type of person. You know, you need to understand that it's stressful, and it's very fast paced, and it's all consuming. You can't half do a film production. You've got to do it boots and all. And so it does tend to overtake your life somewhat, you know. So I find that suits some people and it doesn't suit other people. You know, it's quite hard on family life, I must say. And it has affected my career, you know, bringing up a family. And another reason why I'm still here, actually, in New Zealand. So there's that side of things. But it's also, it's show business, you know. Show business, once it gets its hooks into you, it doesn't let go, and it's it can be very, very exciting place to be in. As a consequence, you know, movie projects happen. They're all on for a period of time, and then that's it. On wrap day, that's it. You're out of a job. So you do have to be able to manage your career and your finances with this all on again, off again sort of aspect to it. So it's a little bit trepidatious, you know. It's a little bit you have to be kind of careful with it. And so it's great to be able to have new people coming in all the time. You know, I love working with the young kids, enthusiastic young kids who bring in all this energy and all their sort of new ideas and their new skills. I've got to say, you know, a lot of the new people come in with these computer skills that I'm never ever going to learn, and I'm reliant on. You know, so it's a good thing to have. But a lot of it's just like can-do attitude, a practical attitude, and enthusiasm, and you've got to be able to make good coffee. You know?
Okay. Well, so the time is up. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for being with us these 2 hours. It was truly an honor and we hope to meet you someday, like physically. So
That'd
thank
be
you
great.
so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And have
Right.
a nice day.
Good. Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. Yeah, it's great. All right. See you. See you.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.
Ok, bueno, si me están escuchando ahí abajo, creo que podemos poner el QR para la asistencia rapidísimo antes de empezar la siguiente charla. Tenemos un par de minutos y ya empezamos. Ahí va.